Sean, just pick one, fam. We got all that and a little bit of lanyard for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, we're free and available on all of your favorite podcast apps and on YouTube, not Twitter, YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Dola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today Saints Wire, Tuesdays in Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. If you ever dreamed about becoming an NFL GM or managing a football franchise, well, if so, then this game is definitely for you. To download the mobile game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in your app stores. And our listeners are going to get a 100% free boost to their franchise by using the promo code Locked On in all caps in the game store. On today's episode, veterans for the New Orleans Saints, those that will be over 30 years old in 2023, should they stay or should they go? Looking at waiting on drafting a quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. What if they don't jump for one with their earliest selection, but instead wait for a mid-round prospect? But first, New Orleans Saints could potentially get a first-round pick if they end up trading Sean Payton. But in order for that to happen, Sean Payton has got to pick a team to go to. And if Sean Payton wants to help the New Orleans Saints out just a little bit, he's got to come up with a decision sooner rather than later, because the longer that he's out there on the market, the more we're going to get concerning and conflicting reports. And we're already seeing that start to happen on Tuesday. One of the big reports that came out on Tuesday came from Diana Rossini, who said that there's another team waiting in the wings, waiting to see if they can get all their ducks in a row. So there's two discernible possibilities if that is truly the case. And of course, both of them have major impacts on the New Orleans Saints. The first of which is that it could just be the Indianapolis Colts, right? They've already moved on from a head coach. They already have a coach opening. So the idea of waiting to kind of see where everything goes, getting all of their interviews in with some of their top candidates and stuff like that in and out of the way, and then looking over at Sean Payton doesn't cost them anything, right? The idea of a team sitting in the wings and like waiting to get their ducks in a row seems to kind of trigger some people into thinking that perhaps there's a team out there that's waiting to see how everything goes with his present interviews that would then be willing to fire a head coach in order to open up a spot and go after Sean Payton. Dallas Cowboys, Miami Dolphins all came to mind. Even Los Angeles Chargers I saw get thrown around a little bit, but it seems unlikely that a team would do that, because what if you fire that head coach, you go and you talk to Sean Payton doesn't want that job, then you just fired a head coach for no reason, right? And then you go into 2023 with a new head coach for a second year in a row, in some cases a third year in a row, depending upon who that team is, or it could be many other times in a row. It's not a smart way to do business. So it's probably the Indianapolis Colts if it's a team at all. If it is the Indianapolis Colts, then that's a good thing, because again, the more teams that are out there and a part of the sweepstakes, the more likely it is that Sean Payton ends up with a team as opposed to going back to Fox. However, the other, and I'm going to be honest, probably more likely scenario is stirring the pot a little bit. You know, if you're Sean Payton or if you're Sean Payton's team or whatever, you're wanting to stir the pot. You're wanting to rustle up some more interest. You're wanting to raise your profile a little bit by saying, oh, well, there's another team out there that's ready to go. And some of that is kind of backed up by a report that we saw out of Denver from Benjamin Albright, who mentioned that Sean Payton, the Denver Broncos, doesn't seem like anything is really kind of imminent there, and that there's some concerns about, how much control he wants, the defensive staff that not the defensive staff, but the staff that he wants to bring in, some away from the field stuff as well. And so there's kind of this like a little rumbling that's out there as well that maybe Sean Payton doesn't have the market that he expected to have this offseason, which of course is then counteracted by another one of Sean Payton's good buddies in Colin Cowherd, who's saying that the Denver Broncos are ready to make him an offer, and it's basically just all in Sean Payton's court now. So what we're seeing here are some conflicting reports, and this is concerning for the New Orleans Saints because some of this is a little bit of a PR battle that's just operating out in public, and that can be bad. Not necessarily to the point where anybody's reputation is going to get ruined or anything like that, but simply from the standpoint that from the New Orleans Saints perspective, they could be looking at this and going, you know what? I think they're trying to drum up interest where there isn't interest, and Sean Payton could potentially not have the market that he expected, not have the market that any of us expected him to have, and therefore would end up going back to Fox by the time that this is all said and done. That's a bad situation for the New Orleans Saints, because if Sean Payton waits a year and then decides to go back to, looking for teams and things like that in 2024's offseason, the Saints don't get as much of a haul as they get this year in order for, in return for his services. His value drops a little bit because they're having to pay less to get him out of his contract. They're getting him on a 1-year deal as opposed to a 2-year deal, all of these other things. So there's a lot of reasons why this ends up having a larger impact. And his value as a coach just simply drops if there's an inability for him to get a job over the course of the offseason, not just because of his asking price, not just because of the team's asking price, not just because of potential compensation being between $20 to $25 million a year for him as a head coach, but because a market didn't materialize in 2023. So therefore, that sets the market for 2024 very low, right? That ends up having an impact on his stock, if you will, and his value, if you will, going into 2024. Now, we know the truth here. Like, we all know that Sean Payton's a fantastic head coach. We all know that Sean Payton absolutely deserves another opportunity to be back in the NFL. We all understand that, and he eventually will be. But if the teams are playing hard to get and not Sean Payton, then that ends up being bad news for the New Orleans Saints, who really sort of need this to work out in their favor. We've been kind of highlighting all the things that the Saints need to do over the course of this offseason: change offensive coordinator, change play caller, potentially look at other changes over on the staff side. We've got all of the offseason kind of goals and benchmarks for them to hit and everything as well. And one of the other ones was getting Sean Payton traded. And so far, none of those things have worked out the way that we expected them to work out, nor have they worked out or gone the way that we expected them to go. And right now, that's turning out to be some bad news for the New Orleans Saints. So while yesterday we were talking about good news with the Arizona Cardinals getting involved, we're now having to talk about potential bad news with the way that sort of this is all playing out in public, which seems to signify that someone somewhere is unhappy with the way that the market is settling for Sean Payton. Whether that be Sean Payton and his camp about the offers and the possibilities that are out there, or whether it's some team or some teams that are not necessarily happy with what Sean Payton is asking for. In either case, not great news for the New Orleans Saints, because all of those things add up and could potentially surmise, if you will, going into that 2023 season, and Sean Payton right back in that Fox broadcast booth, and no draft capital, no trade capital for the New Orleans Saints in that case. So if Sean Payton and the New Orleans Saints are going to get anything out of this entire deal, something's got to come together sooner rather than later. Sean Payton has finished his, just as an update for you in terms of where his process is, Sean Payton has finished his interview process with the Carolina Panthers. Thursday, he's going to be interviewing with the Arizona Cardinals. That one is now finally officially on the books. There was talk of a potential second interview with Sean Payton, but right now that's being postponed as Sean is headed to Arizona to meet with them on Thursday. So there could still be a second interview to come around for the Carolina Panthers. Sounds like there could still be a second interview coming along for the Houston Texans, for the Denver Broncos as well. The Houston Texans, one, they interviewed him on Zoom, and then they said, okay, well, now we're done. We've completed our interview process with Sean Payton. So Houston maybe isn't any longer a part of all this, but before we never say never, just like with the Arizona Cardinals, we'll wait and see how it all plays out. But some potential second interviews on the way, first interview on the way on Thursday for Sean when it comes to the Arizona Cardinals. Hopefully, for the New Orleans Saints' sake, Sean Payton ends up landing a deal and striking a deal with one of those teams. Again, I'm convinced the more that you keep him talking about potentially coaching, the more likely it is that he returns to coaching. But now you got to get the market to materialize as well. And the teams are there. The teams are willing to do the compensation with the New Orleans Saints. Are they willing to do the compensation with Sean Payton? Are they willing to give Sean Payton what he's asking for, not only compensation-wise, but also control-wise, all those other pieces as well. So we'll continue to watch this as it continues to unfold over the course of the next couple of weeks. Coming up next, we're taking a look at our midweek mock draft. What if the New Orleans Saints wait for a quarterback? What's the value in doing that? Do they have the coaching staff to develop a mid-round quarterback, or should they just go ahead and roll the dice early? We're going to break all that down as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. You've heard me talk about this mobile game a ton, and I can't tell you how much fun we're all having competing against one another as our Locked On NFL host. We got Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers. He was our Locked On NFL champion. Now it's your turn to compete, but we're going to tell you more about that here in just a moment. Let me make sure you know what Ultimate Football GM is. Makes you responsible in a mobile app for controlling the destiny of a football franchise. You do that by hiring the right coaches and coordinators, staff, doctors, all that stuff, trading players, negotiating contracts, salary caps. You can even front load, back load contracts, try to get yourself the offensive rookie of the year in the draft. I've done that a couple of times now. All you have to do is choose Locked On in your league in the app in order to join. So if you want to get involved, I want to make sure you've got a deal with you as well. So Locked On Saints listeners are going to get a 100% free boost to your franchise when you also enter the promo code Locked On in all caps in the game store. That's Locked On in all caps. Make sure that you check it out today. Download the app. Just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the App Store today. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks again for being a part of Locked On Saints and making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to also go and check out for your second listen Locked On NFL as well, including a rotating band of characters getting you all the biggest stories from around the National Football League in less than 30 minutes or right around 30 minutes every single Monday through Friday and much more. So I want to take a look at a midweek mock draft here today because the Saints could still find a quarterback that is worth drafting in the mid rounds as opposed to having to reach for one with their highest selection. Now, I still think that it's worth the New Orleans Saints time to invest their earliest selection in a quarterback, especially if they find one that they fall in love with and get a first round pick in exchange for Sean Payton, because then you just get the fifth round, you get the fifth year option, right? Like there's value in having that one way or another. But let's take a look at what it would be like if the Saints waited to draft a quarterback and they just went within the top 100. So this is going to be a 4-round mock draft for us today. And then I want to get into the conversation around quarterbacks, why the Saints should or shouldn't do something like this. So this was with, taking into account the idea of potentially trading Sean Payton to the Denver Broncos. So I got pick 28, which was the first round selection from the Denver Broncos, a part of that, or which is actually the San Francisco 49ers pick. That could be anywhere 28, 29, 30, 31. It can be literally anywhere in that range. And I also got 68, their second of 2 third-round picks. I just went with something that was kind of like mediocre in terms of a return. So I got Antonio Johnson, the safety out of Texas A&M, just somebody that's versatile. The Saints really need to figure out what's going to happen at safety here because they don't have anybody under contract aside from their starters and Smoke Monday, who's on injured reserve. So they bring back Daniel Sorensen, they bring back JT Gray, but then you're still looking to infuse some youth there. You know that you're going to need somebody to potentially step in place of Marcus May, who's got a outstanding DUI case. He's also got a road rage incident here in New Orleans that is going to potentially cost him some games in 2023. So you want somebody that's going to be able to come in and really get some playing time for you. So I'm with Antonio Johnson, who's a versatile safety, gives you that same kind of build, that same type of presence that could rotate and kind of drop into the box, but also play deep along with Tyrann Mathieu and kind of be that interchangeable safety that the Saints were hoping to have with Tyrann Mathieu and Marcus May, but we barely even saw them out on the field together. Pick 40. This is the Saints' original second round pick. Like I said, I'm waiting on quarterback here. So at pick 40, I went with Rashee Rice, the big time wide receiver out of SMU. A little bit of a smaller school guy, but SMU receivers have come into the NFL and performed pretty well. You think about a guy like Drew Prochet, for instance. And of course, the Saints had an SMU guy for years and years. Well, not for years and years, but not too long ago. And Emmanuel Sanders, who was good for them. They only had him for a year, actually. But Rashee Rice is somebody that comes in, he gives you a big build, he makes some contested catches, he's also, he does a little bit of everything. So I like the idea of potentially pairing him up. You could go with more of a speedy receiver here, but the Saints would have to get that possession receiver, that big sort of contested catch guy in free agency first. My eyes are going to be all over Allen Lazard, by the time that we are, getting into free agency and all that. Like, he is my, perfect fit for the New Orleans Saints and what they need at wide receiver, knowing that Michael Thomas is very unlikely to be in New Orleans in 2023, though not impossible. It just doesn't seem likely. So I went and grabbed Rashee Rice just kind of so I could talk to him, put him on your radar, but he kind of fits that mold of a contested catch guy, but does a little bit of everything else too, a bit of an all-around type threat. Then I went with Lucas Van Ness, the edge rusher out of Iowa, a little bit interchangeable, can play outside, can play inside. He's somebody that's probably going to skyrocket a little bit. I mean, I've seen some folks throw him in first rounds in their drafts. It's really rare, but I've seen him pop up in first rounds in drafts every now and then, usually more of a second round guy or at least a second day guy. I was able to get him with the third round pick that I got back from the Denver Broncos. So take that for what you will, but he's a really good value player to get at this point. Then I went quarterback with pick 71, the Saints' original third round selection. I went with Max Duggan. I truly think that by the time the Senior Bowl's said and done, Max Duggan is going to have played himself into a top 100 draft pick position. So getting him at 71 or what could be pushed back from that depending upon compensatory. Well, no, because that would be third round, so never mind. But, getting him at that point in the seventh or at 71 makes sense to me if he does what I expect him to do, which he might not do. And then, in 3 weeks after the Senior Bowl is done, I might come back here and say, okay, well, probably not Max Duggan here, but if the Saints wanted a mid-round guy, then this is where Cameron Ward fits. This is where, Tanner McKee could potentially fall. This is where, depending upon how his draft stock goes throughout the offseason, this is where, maybe Jaren Hall is the one who plays himself into a top 100 position during the Senior Bowl. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And then at pick 113 in the fourth round, I went with Israel Abanikanda, again, out of Pitt. Going to be like 22 years old by the time he comes into the NFL. Can run between the tackles, outside the tackles, catch passes, great pass protector. No telegraphing when this guy is on the field, which is a good sort of blend to have with Alvin Kamara. So how do you feel about the idea of this New Orleans Saints coaching staff being able to develop a mid-round quarterback? Well, there's not a lot of sample size available. The only real rookie or young quarterback they've had on the roster here as of late is, of course, Ian Book. Trevor Siemian was pretty much at his peak. He wasn't getting any better or anything like that in his career. Jameis Winston never really even got to see the field or an opportunity. Andy Dalton's not going to get any better than he is now at 35 years old, although he was 7th ranked in terms of grading by Pro Football Focus, but that doesn't tell you the entire story, right? Like, can this team game plan enough for a young quarterback? Can this team develop or coaching staff develop a young quarterback over the course of a rookie contract and have him ready to win games within 3 to 4 years? I don't know that you're going to get that with this coaching staff. There's going to have to be some changes there, but we'll see, right? We haven't really gotten to see Ronald Curry fully develop a quarterback. He's only been a quarterback coach in that role for 2 years. The only young quarterback he's worked with is Ian Book, and he had 1 year with Ian Book. Now, he got 4 different quarterbacks ready to start games in 2021. That was impressive. He got, 2 different quarterbacks ready to start games here in 2022. That is also impressive. So there is something to be said in all of that. We'll see a little bit of his offensive coordinator chops when it comes to his ability to develop develop and sort of scout and do all of this stuff while he's at the Senior Bowl as the offensive coordinator for the national team this coming week. This coming week. Geez, the Senior Bowl is like right there already. Geez. And so you might have some understandable question marks about the idea of this team investing in a mid-round quarterback. I have those question marks too. It's one of the reasons why I think they should use their earliest draft selection on a quarterback this year. Get somebody that's a little bit more polished, a little bit more proven, and ready to go so that there's a little bit less of a leap for them to make. And it's really just about adjusting to the NFL game more than it is about digging something out of them that you haven't seen before, which is what you're going to have to do with these mid-round guys. But, look, who Andy Dalton is versus who he was, what he was in 2022 versus what the system is and how the Saints offense looked like. No one thing tells that entire story. So you have to look at a whole bunch of stuff around there. Same thing with kind of this potential of bringing in a mid-round quarterback. What can this team do with a mid-round QB? I don't know if it's a lot right now. I don't know if it's a lot within the next 3 or 4 years, and that's a little bit of an issue. So I think going for the more polished guys, the guys that are a little bit more ready to translate as opposed to having to pull something out of them is a much better position for the New Orleans Saints. So just a little fun little midweek mock draft and a look at what a mid-round quarterback selection could look like for the New Orleans Saints. And again, if you don't like Max Duggan, it's fine, right? You look at Cameron Ward, you look at Jaren Hall, you look at Tanner McKee, like we mentioned, you look at some of these other guys. I know people feel like Stetson Bennett could potentially go in the third round. I don't believe that, but there's a lot of these different pieces that you could potentially find. Okay. Enough about me, enough about the rookies. Let's talk about the veterans. Should Cameron Jordan be a New Orleans Saint in 2023? What about Demario Davis? What about James Hurst? What about Chris Harris Jr.? Let's play stay or go to wrap up today's episode with some of the older veterans players on the New Orleans Saints roster. We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Today's episode is brought to you by our new partners here at the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports book in all of America. It's FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, it gets even better because they have so many different features that make betting on sports super fun and super easy. And for new customers, you're going to be able to join today and get started with $150 in free bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just sign up today over at FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel has all of your favorite bets, including the AFC, NFC championship games, and much more around the world of sports for you to check out over at their website today. Plus, you can even combine all of your bets for a bigger chance for a bigger payout with same game parlays, same day parlays, all that good stuff as well. So football fans, don't miss out. Place your $5 bet today, your first $5 bet, and you're going to be able to get that $150 in free bets, win or lose. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel today, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with a little bit of stay or go. The New Orleans Saints presently have 12 players that are 30 years or older, some of which on expiring contracts, some of which still on contract. And that means that it could be time for some of the guys that are on contract to potentially be cap casualties. So which ones will be cap casualties? Which ones on expiring contracts? Okay. The horror, if you're watching me on YouTube, the horror that you just saw on my face was that I wasn't sure if my audio was being recorded this entire time. It is. We're good. You have not been watching a silent video for the last 20 minutes. Okay. So let's start off with the guys that are on expiring contracts. We'll go from oldest to youngest, 30 years or older as of this season, right? So right now, the oldest on an expiring contract is Andy Dalton, 35 years old. There's a good chance, actually, that Andy Dalton is back in New Orleans. And it might not be as a starter. It might be as a veteran backup to basically do the role that he was asked to do in 2000. Well, that he was originally asked to do in 2022, to come in, be the veteran backup, be a mentor for a younger quarterback, potentially even a younger veteran quarterback, right? Like, let's say that they sign Andy Dalton, but then they also go out and get Jimmy Garoppolo, then it's good to have that, veteran relationship between the two. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Andy Dalton back. And in fact, I'll say Andy Dalton stays in New Orleans in 2023. That's more of a guess than anything else. Another guy on an expiring contract. We got two of them here, 33 years old, 32 years old as of right now. Chris Harris Jr., as well as Daniel Sorensen. Chris Harris Jr., of course, the veteran nickel corner that had come in here over the course of the last season. And I think he goes. I don't think that he's back in New Orleans in 2023. I think that, he was somebody that the Saints brought in halfway through the season, which kind of indicates where that was a little bit more of like a we need the bodies type of a situation. I think the Saints will be much more prepared at secondary over the course of the offseason without having to go there. But Chris Harris Jr., a name to keep in mind if the Saints get into a bind throughout the season in 2023. Daniel Sorensen, on the other hand, I do think there's a chance that he's back in 2023. Again, the Saints only have two safeties on contract right now that are healthy, and I'm putting quotes around healthy because one of the guys I'm talking about is Marcus May, the other which is Tyrann Mathieu, and then Smoke Monday is around, but he's on injured reserve. So re-signing Daniel Sorensen, re-signing JT Gray, getting a couple of special teamers, but then depth at that position, and then potentially adding to it in the draft makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to say Daniel Sorensen on an expiring contract, he was on a one-year deal, is back in 2023. David Johnson, running back, 31 years old, signed partway through the season. Same thing as Chris Harris Jr. Don't think that he's back in 2023, but I do think the Saints have to do a lot of work on the at that running back room to continue to rebuild all of that. We'll be very happy to see Benjamin back in 2023, though, and a little bit more a part of what the Saints are doing. Zach Wood at 30 years old. Oh, his contract's not expiring. But anyway, Zach Wood's not going anywhere. He's like one of the Saints' core special teamers. He ain't going nowhere. At 30 years old, David Onyemata, he's on an expiring contract. I think it's in the best interest of the New Orleans Saints to bring him back, so I'll pick him to stay. All right, let's get to the guys that aren't necessarily on expiring contracts, but could potentially be shed here over the course of this off season. One of the ones that's really intriguing right now, Bradley Roby at 30 years old. Could he be shed in order to free up some salary cap space? Not a lot to be freed up if they move on from him, so I'll go ahead and pick him to stay. Tyrann Mathieu, I'm picking him to stay as well. He tweeted the other day saying he was looking forward to year two. In response to something that Rashid Shaheed tweeted out, so was he talking about year two of Rashid Shaheed or year two of himself in New Orleans? Porque no los dos? I think it's both. 31-year-old James Hurst, I think he's back. I think he stays in New Orleans. 32-year-old Taysom Hill, I think he's in New Orleans unless Sean Payton gets a job and helps that other team create some kind of like crazy thing to where they end up trading for Taysom Hill. But again, I discussed that in yesterday's episode. You're already giving up capital to bring in Sean Payton. giving up more capital the following year to bring in one of Sean Payton's favorite weapons at 32 years old probably doesn't make a lot of sense. Now the big two. Cameron Jordan, 33 years old. David Onyemata, 34 years old. Should they be back in New Orleans? Should they be back in New Orleans? Yes, they should stay. Again, this is a team that is going into one of those kind of rebuild eras, and players like Cameron Jordan and Demario Davis are incredibly important to maintaining the locker room, keeping everything together there. Demario Davis is somebody that has been huge for the New Orleans Saints, the only linebacker to play 100% of defensive snaps for which he was eligible in 2022. He's coming into 2023. I think he's going to be ready to go for at least another couple of years. But the Saints looking really good at linebacker behind him as well. Pete Werner, Caden Ellis, who is a free agent, but hopefully will be able to stick around with New Orleans, in which case, they're in a really good place post Demario Davis. But I don't think you need to look for them to start the post Demario Davis era sooner than they're ready. I think both of these guys, Demario Davis and Cam Jordan's already sort of been out there talking about how he wants to be back in New Orleans. He told us that in the locker room in one of his, in one of his interviews that was filmed with us. Don't be surprised if you don't hear anything about his contract status over the course of most of the off season. These guys are going to go away from football for a while and then come back to it when it's time to come back to it. But I don't think that either of these guys is going anywhere. So I'm going to pick them both to stay. But obviously, those are the two biggest names in terms of these veteran players that could potentially be shed for salary cap purposes over the course of the offseason. But I think right now you've got Michael Thomas, who's already kind of being telegraphed as a post-June 1 cut. You can only do 2 of these post-June 1 transactions in terms of designating them early on. And so we know Michael Thomas is very likely to be one of them. It's very likely too that Jameis Winston is the other. So I don't really see them making any moves with Cam Jordan and Demario Davis. However, I wouldn't be surprised to see when Cam Jordan's ready to talk contract, him redo his contract so that the Saints have a little bit more spending room, have a little bit more area. That way you end up keeping him and freeing up salary cap space as opposed to getting rid of him in order to free up salary cap space. That's the kind of move that Cam Jordan is trying to make. He wants to be a lifer with the New Orleans Saints, just like his dad was a lifer, Steve Jordan, with the Minnesota Vikings as a tight end there. I think that he's well on his way to doing that. He's now the franchise sack holder with the New Orleans Saints, and I'm sure he would love to extend that lead on this guy right here, Ricky Jackson. So I go with stay on both Demario Davis and Cameron Jordan at this point in the year of our Lord, January 25th of 2023. We'll see what happens over the course of the offseason, however. All right. Thank you again for being a part of another episode of Locked On Saints. Really appreciate all the comments and the YouTube page and Twitter and the Facebook group. Everybody's really excited about the offseason, even though things feel a little weird still because of, the sort of lack of confidence in the organization right now, but people are still talking. You guys are really interacting with me, and we're having good conversations and we're having fun back and forth. People are picking on me for dumb things that I do on the show, which I love. I love being able to be a human being and not just some robot that talks to you for 30 minutes, even though I'm still very much a robot that talks to you for 30 minutes. So I really, really just want to say thank you for being a part of what Locked On Saints has become and is becoming, because I'm really excited about where the show is headed and what we're all doing here together. So I appreciate you as always. Coming up tomorrow, it is Thursday. On Thursdays, we break down draft prospects. So let's get a look at Tanner McKee, the Stanford quarterback. He's one of the few quarterbacks that we haven't really gotten into just yet. He's a different type of quarterback than what I've discussed before. And maybe that's something that's worth being excited about. Maybe the mobile quarterback or the dual threat quarterback isn't the way the New Orleans Saints want to go, and instead they want to go with the pocket passer that's a really good and accurate passer. Then Tanner McKee is your guy. We're going to break him down tomorrow in tomorrow's episode. Really looking forward to that. Appreciate you, as always, y'all, for making Locked On Saints a part of your day and a part of your routine, especially for making us your first listen. For your second listen, make sure you go and check out Locked On NFL as well, wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Thanks, as always, for saying yes to me and the show. If you see me, say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.